When Foxy Brown comes to town, all the brothers gather round, 'cause she can really shake 'em down. Foxy lady, Foxy lady. Pam Grier, that one chick hit squad who creamed you as coffee, is back to do a job on the mob as Foxy Brown.
You tell me who you want done, and I'll do the hell out of it.
A chick with drive who don't take no jive.
It's ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ticklish Business. I'm Kristen, joined as always by Emily. And this week, we are going back to the 70s to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Foxy Brown and talk about the amazing career and life of all-around badass Pam Grier. Emily, are you excited? Because I'm very excited.
I'm so excited. There's so much to discuss in this movie. Pam is gorgeous. The clothes are gorgeous. There's so much stuff happening politically. It's going to be a hell of an episode.
Joining us to talk about all things Pam are the hosts of the amazing podcast that everybody should listen to, Black Girl Film Club, Ashley and Brittany. Ladies, how are both of you today?
We're doing well. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for wanting to sit down and talk with us about Pam. For people that don't know your podcast, can you talk a little bit about it, why you created it, the films and content you're looking at?
Our podcast is basically a conversation about movies between friends. It was kind of started because we wanted to talk about movies that maybe people haven't heard of or maybe were a little bit underrepresented and underrated. And we just started this project and it has grown from there.
We just chit chat. Sometimes we go off topic. So if you're looking for a more extensive conversation beyond the movie, you might get that as well. Us kind of doing what we were doing already on Twitter and other online spaces just for everybody else to listen. One of the most recurring comments on our podcast has been like, you've introduced me to a movie that I wouldn't have considered before. And I always feel like people should watch more of classic films and dive more into classic film history. So I was really happy that people will start watching movies because we suggest them or just because we're talking about them.
One thing that I like about our podcast is we introduce each other to different types of films. Like Ashley has made me consider movies I would never in my life consider watching. I have introduced her to some movies. So it's always fun engaging in that exchange.
Sounds very similar to our dynamic. Emily is not a hardcore classic film nerd like I am. And anytime you can get somebody to watch something like Strangers on a Train before David Fincher inevitably remakes it, which supposedly he's going to do.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, no is right. Of course, we're all here to talk about Pam Grier and Foxy Brown and all of her film work. I want to start with a more general conversation about Pam Grier. What was the first movie, or how did you first come to hear about her? And I'll start with Brittany.
Pam Grier is just a person that you know about from birth, at least to me. She's just an ever-present presence in many lives. But I feel like my first moment actually watching a film starring her is when I saw Jackie Brown as a kid. That was my first introduction to her formally. Through pop culture, she was just ever present. We have Foxy Brown, the rapper, who was inspired by her filmography. And she just made appearance in different things that I've watched over the years, but I didn't sit down to watch a film starring her until I was in my early teens.
I would say the same thing, like just being a kid into rap music and stuff, you would just hear references to Foxy Brown, like Pam Grier herself. Also, she would get like name dropped in shows I would watch on Martin and things like that. She was just the standard of a beautiful, gorgeous woman that men were kind of like, damn, she's Pam Grier or something, you know, that kind of thing. My first watch of hers may have been Jackie Brown as well, but I don't know if I like really got that. Sometimes I'll watch a movie and just kind of not even really absorb that, the people that are in it, which is terrible. But when we watched Foxy Brown for our podcast, it was like one of the first episodes that we did. And I was like, she is amazing. I knew her story and I knew about her as a person, but actually watching Foxy Brown for the first time, and especially watching it for the podcast, like you have to pay attention to more things than you would just putting on a movie on a Saturday night. That was, I feel like, when I was, oh wow, Pam Grier, she's everything. Like, of course, everybody's been talking about her for decades since I was a kid. Obviously, it was just became like a duh girl. Like, what were you doing?
It's similar for me because I saw Jackie Brown probably as a kid when I shouldn't, which weirdly enough, my mother wouldn't let me watch Pulp Fiction, but she let me watch Jackie Brown. Go figure that one. But I didn't understand what Tarantino was doing with referencing blaxploitation, and I certainly didn't know that Pam Grier was Pam Grier, which is funny now when I watch movies from the 90s. I love Jawbreaker, one of my favorite 90s teen movies. Why is Pam Grier in it? Why not? If anything, she's not in it enough. She would show up in movies, and I had no idea of the sense of the history, which happens a lot when you're an old film fan. You go back and realize that a lot of these older actors have been around forever, and you just never really notice them. The TCM Classic Film Festival had Pam Grier show up a couple years ago, and I was fortunate to meet her. She is very nice. She's kooky in the best way, which is great. It really did inspire me to watch a lot of her original foundational films like Coffee and Sheba Baby and Black Mama, White Mama. There's a lot of back and forth discourse, which we'll get into, about Pam Grier's legacy in film. But watching her in Foxy Brown, which I had not seen, which was one of the few movies I hadn't seen before last night, she feels so revolutionary to me. The fact that she is a Black woman that is allowed to be sexual, that is allowed to have agency and kick ass. I love it. I love her personality and the career that she's cultivated. If anything, I feel like she needs to be placed alongside icons of the industry like Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, the Toms, and she's not, which makes me upset. Emily, what about you?
My first introduction to watching Pam Grier on screen, again, like I knew she was an icon. I knew she was an incredible actress and her history. But my first time watching her on screen was actually because of The L Word, the original L Word on HBO in the early 2000s. All of its issues and all of its problems that it cultivated, it just really drove home the fact of how intentional she was in choosing roles and the projects that she chose to do and the things that she gave her name to when she worked. And I just think she's such an interesting, intelligent, powerful actress. And it was just so cool to go back and watch more of her older things, the things that made her Pam Grier.
We're going to talk about a lot of other Pam Grier movies, but we're going to use Foxy Brown as a springboard to talk about Pam Grier. And the plot of that movie involves Pam Grier's character, eponymously named Foxy Brown, whose boyfriend is gunned down in front of her and decides to take vengeance on the white drug dealers that are running things by going undercover as a sex worker in order to take them down. Emily, you had a really interesting theory about this movie that I want us to talk about first and foremost.
I texted you just before we started recording, and I said, Foxy Brown is a Western, and a damn good one at that. The detail that I first noticed was she's not introduced to us on screen doing this, but her first action is coming into the fray in a Dodge Charger. And so she rides in on a horse into battle. It's just the coolest thing. And I was going through all of the Western plot beats. You have a town or townspeople who are stricken by bad guys. They need the cowboy or the sheriff to come in and save them from it, come up with a plan to save them from it. But at the end, she rides off into the sunset, sort of hashtag spoiler alerts. And it just follows so many of these incredible tropes of Westerns, but obviously undoes them all by being a Black woman who never get shown in Westerns to begin with. And I just thought it was really, really fascinating that my brain put all those little bits and pieces together. And I was like, oh, I need to go back and rewatch this and write a whole thing about it because it's really fascinating.
I definitely see the Western elements now that you bring them up. What I was really impressed by with this movie is the fact that it is so female-centric. A lot of Pam Grier's films had female villains, which I really love. In this especially, Catherine Loder, who plays the boss at the top, Catherine Wall, this was her last film. She ended up dying very young of diabetes. She's such a great smarmy foil to Foxy's character. She's also ridiculously sexual. She is also a horrific human being. This is a landscape where women have the power to do all the things. And a lot of the men are presented as inept or stupid. There's also a lot of literal penis slapping in this movie, which I was very, very surprised by. Happens more than once. The scene with the nurse that comes in, Foxy Brown and her boyfriend are making out, and of course he is aroused, and the nurse has to slap him in a very uncomfortable place. Or later, there's the sequence where Foxy and the other girl are in the assignation with the Senate or the judge, and they're mocking how ill-equipped he is, so to speak. I love this. I don't know if this has any bearing on the plot, and I really don't care because it's just awesome.
I was rewatching it last night and I was thinking, this movie, it just goes many places that I always forget it ends up going, because Foxy ends up being like I don't know, I'd say like ordinary woman, but she's just kind of like living her life. And then she ends up going into like deep undercover, and then she ends up stealing an airplane and flying an airplane and doing all these things. I almost had forgotten so many like details of the plot because of that part. Go from like all these different highs and lows throughout the movie. She has so many different facets of herself, and she's so resourceful and she's so strong, but she also vulnerable person. She's not indestructible. She's not some sort of superhuman where she just feels the fires of rage and just goes on like some sort of indestructible rampage. She gets knocked down, but she's always fighting for what she believes in like a very real way. Pam herself said that she based Foxy Brown on her aunts. You can really see that she feels like somebody that I would know, which is probably one of the best parts about her. Like, even though she's otherworldly beautiful and all her beautiful costume changes and wig changes, she just feels like somebody I would know. And of course you want to root for her because I love revenge movies, but she's especially infuses her characters with somebody like something super likable. Like, you just always want her to win.
She just feels like Ashley mentioned, is someone you know. And given her character, is someone you would go to when you're in trouble. And you know that she'll be there to help you get out of it, no matter how deep of the trouble that you're in. If you're like Link Brown, who is into some deep stuff with owing people $20,000, which is quite a bit of money, which I don't understand how he would get that back in like 2 days. First person he called was his sister to help him out. I was in trouble, not that kind of trouble. I would still call Foxy to come save me too.
What is really something that I love about Pam Grier's films of this era is how often she played a regular woman in really over-the-top situations. Friday Foster is a good example, which is another movie I watched, which I also highly recommend, where she's a photographer for a newspaper, and she goes to get photos of this super rich guy and ends up stumbling on an assassination attempt. She's not a police officer. She's not a government agent. She's not a Wonder Woman. She's just an average woman, has a lot of impressive skills. That scene in the bar with the other women where the woman's like, I have a black belt in karate. And she says, well, I have a black belt in bar stools. That sums it up perfectly. She just knows how to fight. Not really sure where the high kicks and all of that came from, but I don't care. I believe that she knows this stuff.
And she's a very like regular fighter too. She's not doing super high kung fu. We watched this against like Dolomite. That one was always funny because there's some faux karate going on. And Foxy Brown, the fighting is genuine. Like, Pam's throwing bar stool, she's hitting people with bottles and things like that. It doesn't feel like she's some sort of superwoman coming out of nowhere. Like, she's doing things that I would probably grab a bottle if I had to or something like that. It's just, she feels very ordinary, but she is in these super over the top situations, and she's just using her resources to the best of her ability.
So the one critique I have with Jackie Brown is that Tarantino talked about how he wrote this for Pam Grier to honor a lot of the films that she made. And the one thing that I always get irked with Jackie Brown is the fact that, for people who haven't seen Jackie Brown, she's a flight attendant that is also a drug mule for Samuel L. Jackson's character. Pam Grier was always fighting against the drug dealers. She wouldn't be a part of it. Now, mind you, Jackie Brown still is that very smart, resourceful, intuitive woman who is trying to get one over on the Samuel L. Jackson character at the end, but it's the one just little tweak where Quentin Tarantino gets a lot of reasonable guff for how he works with actors of color. it's the one thing where I'm just like, QT, I don't know if you're really paying attention to these movies.
Especially when you watch Jackie Brown after watching a lot of blaxploitation movies, you can definitely see the references, and Tarantino is always very open about his references, what he's kind of watching. Like you can tell like what he's into just from the movies that he makes. But yeah, it is a weird flip on what the roles that Pam would take and like the kind of women she would portray. I don't know if it's just the 90s falling on hard times type exploration. The people who fight the man kind of start working for the man, I guess. And I don't think she really liked anybody in Jackie Brown either, which would have been cool to see flight attendant throw hands.
A lot of gunplay.
Yeah, which of course in Foxy Brown, Foxy has several guns that she wields and she's not afraid to. And even Coffee as well. I watched a little bit of it last night and she's basically running around with like a shotgun for most of the movie. So she definitely wasn't afraid to handle a weapon.
Which you bring up Coffee, which there's a whole history with Foxy Brown and Coffee. This was supposed to be a sequel to Coffee. They were going to call it Burn, Coffee, Burn, which that might be both the best and the worst title ever. American International Pictures, which was the studio, decided that it didn't want to do a sequel and decided to make Foxy Brown. But supposedly the script was already written as a Coffee sequel, so they had to change things. So it's hilarious when you read the descriptions of Foxy Brown where they say she's a nurse, and that's not true. We never know what her profession is, but she was a nurse in Coffee. And because the director Jack Hill said once it wasn't a sequel anymore, they literally couldn't have her do the profession anymore, which, okay, that's fine. And honestly, I think that goes well towards the Western conceit, Emily, you were talking about. She's not a man with no name, so to speak. She has a name, but we don't really know anything about her other than the fact that she has a brother who's a ne'er-do-well. And she has a boyfriend who was an undercover narcotics officer, which on the one hand, in the rise of second wave feminism, you could say that Foxy Brown her only history is through the men in her life. But I don't really get that conceit. She really is this really great shadowy figure where you don't really know what her past is. You don't need to know.
Everybody in the neighborhood knows who Foxy is, and everybody thinks highly of her. That's all you need to know. She is capable, she is strong, and she is there. And that's what you need to know. It's fantastic.
The fact that she can mobilize the Black Panthers at the end of this movie is pretty remarkable. They respect her. They're presented as a group that is willing to listen to this woman. And they say at one point, you know, she's out for revenge. And she says, no, you get the justice and I'll get the revenge. And I love those moments of interplay between the community, because this really is much like Sheba Baby and much like Coffee, where characters in the character of Pam Grier's life, the action tends to start when people that she knows are hurt or killed. And in this movie, it's really unique in that its emphasis is on, she talks to people around the town that talk about the slavery, the new slavery that they talk about, which is the fact that people of color are being hooked on heroin, which was a very real thing. I mean, the war on drugs, you can read the history going back decades and how often it did affect Black neighborhoods. But I love that she is a character that everybody understands what's going on in this neighborhood. And she wants to fight against it by mobilizing the community to take down Catherine Loder's white character, who is engaged in sex trafficking, drugs. She's pretty much a one-woman horror show because she controls everything. She controls drugs. She controls women. She has an island, which the slavery comparisons I thought were interestingly used in the sense that the character talks about how they have an island and they have a farm, which again, the imagery is so loaded in those sequences. I don't know if I should be giving screenwriter Jack Hill just like a lot of credit or not, because the script is really navigating some complex issues in 90 minutes in a movie that involves a lot of really great costume changes. I don't know.
It does go through a lot of different beats, and it is kind of the things that people were going through back then, which if I was a kid in the 70s watching this, I was like, yeah, like the things I've been hearing in everyday life. But it is funny. I don't know how much input Pam had on some finer talking points because it's funny when you like think about it, because you Jack Hill, you're just like, what? How tapped in were you to the culture and to the conversation at hand. He directed this, and did he direct The Big Birdcage as well, which also deals with a little bit of the same, not the same, but it's like the women in prison subgenre. So it is kind of another layer of enslavement conversation. So he has like these different beats that he hits in these movies, but it is funny. Did Pam have any like say or discussion? Because she was such a new actress at the time. That is something I wonder.
He also did Coffee too. Jack Hill is a really interesting figure in just exploitation cinema. He started directing in the early 60s. And for most people, if you don't know his work from Coffee and Foxy Brown, most people know Spider Baby, which is from 1967, which is a really bizarre horror film. Also has Sid Haig, frequent Pam Grier collaborator in her movies. It's a movie about incest and inbred children, and it's actually remarkably heartfelt. It's so bizarre. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's got Lon Chaney Jr. Everybody go watch Spider Baby. I can't believe it exists. It's interesting how he utilizes these fraught topics that are so complex and nuanced and attempts to boil them down in a way that the audience will understand and care about in a 90-minute movie. This movie is just 90 minutes. I'm giving him kudos. I'm going to give him some kudos.
Brittany, were you the one who talked to me about Spider Baby? I know I've heard that name before. I feel like that's something that you would have picked up on.
It is on my watch list. I haven't had an opportunity to watch it yet. I've scrolled by it so many times that I just had to add it to a list for a rainy day.
It's worth it. It is weird as hell, but Lon Chaney Jr. just gets you right in the feels. Did not expect that. With blaxploitation, there is both pro and con. For as many people that celebrate the genre, many people who say that the genre is reductive. In the case of Foxy Brown, definitely did have pause in sequences where her introduction to the film is she gets out of bed and takes her top off and the camera is just looking at her breasts. You know, Pam Grier's talked very openly about a lot of the movies she made at the time she was naked. She has a lot of really funny stories. If anybody listens to the podcast that TCM did on Pam Grier, it's great. And I was fortunate to be, when she came to the TCM Film Festival and did a conversation, she was talking about being nude on screen, and you could just see Ben Mankiewicz just not know how to respond to her talking about her vagina. It was hilarious. There are a lot of moments where she does have to expose her body, especially in this movie where she is playing a sex worker, which I know the reviews of the time were like, she really just jumps right into sex work without thinking of any other way she could have maybe tried to take them down. But at the same time, I go back to what Pam Grier herself has said about why she was so frequently nude in her movies, which was that Black women, specifically darker skinned Black women, were not presented as beautiful. And they were not presented as characters that had sexual desire or were desired. And that her being nude was a way to say, we are beautiful. We have beautiful bodies. And you know what? Pam Grier did have a beautiful body. And if she wanted to show it to whomever for as long as she wants, who am I to say no? I see both sides of the discussion, especially thinking something like this movie, which, mind you, we can talk about the third act twist where she's at the farm and there is sexual assault. Which I was like, did we really need that? Do we need to go that way? But in the moments where she is engaged in the sex work, she is not presented as nude in a subservient position, which I appreciated. It almost feels like she's nude on her own terms.
I heard that same thing as well, because I did listen to all of the TCM podcasts featuring Pam, which is really, really great. Everybody should definitely listen to it. I learned stuff about her that I don't think I'd ever heard before. And she's very like comfortable and just like talking about her life. And she's been through so much. It's so crazy. But she did talk about being naked, which I can definitely see nowadays, being someone who grew up watching video vixens and things like that. It's so normal to me now to see someone half naked, a Black person or Black woman half naked. So it's kind of like a weird thing to put myself back in like the 70s, seeing it as like a more like a revolutionary thing. Even nowadays, still, there's still like the desirability conversation and who's desired and who's not. Probably up until that point, there hadn't been scenes like this where she's in love with her boyfriend and making out and having sex like couples do, but also having her be a very beautiful figure on screen. Even when she looks bad or she's been through it, like she still looks beautiful. And that might be like the exploitation part of the genre, but I can see why people like have issues. And the sexual assault scene, I feel like you could suggest those without doing too much. But again, because it's like an exploitation drama, I can see why they did that because it's titillating. Her showing her body at a time where people were going Black is beautiful and those kind of movements, which were pretty new as far as like a national conversation. Her adding to that is huge. People still circulate pictures of Pam Grier in the 70s. See him on Twitter all the time. Nude, not nude. She's so big for us. I don't know, like Brittany, like, did you ever grow up seeing pictures of Pam Grier like that? Or I know we still see them, but like, how did you feel about those?
I just know growing up, she was the ideal woman. This is the person that you want to be aspirationally. She was just built up as like the most gorgeous woman ever. My first time watching Foxy Brown, when we talked about it on the podcast, we spent like at least 20 minutes talking about how beautiful she is. It is different to see a woman that looks like her being portrayed in this light in terms of the glamour and the beauty, and knowing that they had someone who created different outfits specifically for the film that showcased her beauty. It was a different experience watching it. Watching it again, I do take some pause in why she had to be a sex worker within the film. I just chalk that up to it being 1974, and this is just what it is, and this is just how it is for Black actors and actresses to have film roles that are more substantial than they had been previously. Have to take the good and the bad with it.
Have you joined Ticklish Biz's Patreon yet? You should, just like Allie Moore, Amy Hart, Danny, David Floyd, Donna Hill, Gates, Jacob Haller, Jonathan Watkins, Krista Painter, McF, and Rachel Clark. Listen to episodes 48 hours early, watch exclusive video interviews, receive merch, and even guest on an episode. You also get access to bonus series like Based on a True Podcast, double features, and our latest series, But Have You Read the Series? It all starts at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Back to the show. I talk a lot about compartmentalizing as a disabled woman. We're looking for perfect depictions. We would love nothing. I completely understand that concept. What I love about this movie and a lot of Pam Grier's other movies is that while there is nudity and sex, that you get the 70s porn guitars and all of that. For me, I kept thinking about how second wave feminism was often denounced for the fact that it excluded Black women. It felt more like a movement for white women. I kept wondering, would I feel this way if the character was a white woman? The fact that we just don't get Black women in these roles enough. Is that where that divide comes from? Because for me, watching this movie especially, she's having the sex scene with her boyfriend. It's a very tender-hearted scene. It's very playful. You get to see Black female pleasure, which regardless of gender, that often is not a thing that gets emphasized. And even in the scene where she's doing the sex work, she's working more towards helping the friend that she makes, who has a child and a husband, leave the life than anything else, which so many of her characters feel revolutionary. And the fact that she is allowed to, shout out to costumer Ruthie West, who did her wardrobe in this movie, that red jumpsuit that she wears is utterly amazing. I need that just plastered on my wall. That needs to be in a museum. I need to know where this jumpsuit went because it's fantastic. And Sheba Baby is another one where she gets to wear really lengthy gowns and she gets her hair all done up. She is an old movie icon, which, as somebody who has been doing this podcast for so long, and we're often left with celebrating the gains, that Hattie McDaniels made, or having to talk about how actresses like Dorothy Dandridge and Lena Horne were not allowed to be film stars because they were too hot and they would make white men feel a certain way. The fact that Pam Grier gets to just come down a staircase and the guy that is the other half of the Catherine Walls empire, the guy that she's just obsessed with, which he's a little mid. I don't really know why we're all losing our mind over him, but he is attracted to Foxy Brown. The fact that she's turning heads regardless of race, just men are willing to do whatever for her. That's still revolutionary. And also, it proves that we need to be putting Pam Grier alongside the likes of some of the most beautiful women of all time, like your Marilyn Monroes. I don't know anybody else other than these two at this point because my brain is shorted out from just all the hotness.
She's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of hot women for me.
Right?
Like, she just has that place there in my hearts and the hearts of many.
I would also say, too, that because she's in so many different sexual situations, like, she knows she's hot. That's the thing about it. She's not just like, oh, who, me? Everybody's looking at me. I can't understand why. Like, she knows she looks good. And there's something really strong about that because she's using what she has, but it doesn't ever feel like she's not in on it or she doesn't get it. We have a lot of discussions nowadays about using your femininity in certain ways, and she totally takes advantage of it. She knows she looks good. She knows what she's doing. She's catching the one guy's eye when she's getting measured. He can totally see her side boob and she knows it. And she's just like, yes, please keep looking. I know that you want this. But she's in control of the situation for the most part when she does these things. She's not just, except for the part in the third act, she's not being taken advantage of. She's fully in control, which I think is huge, especially at a time where Black women were kind of just being told what to do and who to do it with. She has that agency through her sexuality, which I think is really important. And when we compare this to Dolomite, speaking of the one sex scene with her boyfriend, there's a sex scene in Dolomite, and we talked about this, where it's just so POV and gross looking. And it's like in comparison to Foxy Brown, it's just, even though it's like a man's eye, it still felt like not exploitative. I was like, oh, okay, she loves her boyfriend. And she's very like loving. And even when she's out for revenge and wanting to burn down the system, she's like a lover girl. In comparison to Dolomite, like that scene, I don't know if Brittany remembers that scene, but it was so horror movie-ish almost. I don't think anybody would put Pam in that sort of situation, shoot her from that angle. The Dolomite one was so bad. I just think about it sometimes and cringe.
It is gratuitous. It's funny. And I don't think it was meant to be funny. I think it was meant to portray passion and sensuality, but it definitely misses the mark. But as Ashley was saying, the sexuality in Foxy Brown, it seems more convincing and more grounded and natural.
Every man in the movie acknowledges that she is gorgeous. And then when she uses her hotness as a tool, it's as a way of showing men's weakness, not her one-dimensionality. All the men that respect her go, oh, she's beautiful and smart and courageous and pillar of our community. And then when she has to use her hotness as a tool, she immediately flips it as a way to show your weakness, not my singularity. And it's really, really cool how deftly she does it. The scene where she's berating the judge and he goes, oh, this is like a sexy, sexy game. And she's like, you keep thinking that, sure. I'm going to humiliate you and destroy you because you are a horny idiot.
And it's another element of something that I was thinking about this just now, going back to Jackie Brown, which I also rewatched last night, which I've seen Jackie Brown several times because that movie is Tarantino's best movie. Don't at me. What a lot of people love about that movie is the relationship that Pam Grier has with Robert Forster in that movie, where Robert Forster plays the bail bondsman, that they have a back and forth. The movie ends with the question of whether they are going to end up together. Decision is made. I don't want to spoil it for everybody. I love the sequences between her and Robert Forster. It's very old Hollywood. It's a lot of glances and a lot of touches and back and forth. But, and I've told Pam Grier this to her face, I was like, you made all these movies where you had sex with the men you were in love with, and you and Robert Forster don't have a love scene together. I don't get that. I'm very upset about this because he's hot, you're hot. I wanted this to happen. Pam Grier famously told me, she was like, oh, I tried to get Quentin to film a scene. She's like, I would have wrapped my legs around Robert Forster. And I was like, yes, that is the correct answer. And I said to her, I'm like, I would have watched it because it would have been great. And she looked at me and she was like, you're nasty. I like you. And I was like, I'm going to chisel that on my tombstone. I've been endorsed by Pam Grier for being, as Emily mentioned, a horny idiot.
I wonder, too, if Quentin was maybe being too precious with Pam.
Yeah.
I know he said he's grown up watching her, and so maybe there's that wall or something, like, because he does some crazy things with his characters. He treats Jackie Brown like very delicately. Obviously, she's under a lot of threats, but it doesn't feel like he puts her through the ringer the way he does with Thurman or someone else. Very interesting. I watched a little bit of Jackie Brown this morning and just seeing Robert Forster's heart eyes when he sees Jackie.
Yeah. Yep.
This is so perfect. I wish they had gone a little bit farther, but maybe that's not even like Quentin's strong suit too.
I was going to say,
like
Quentin Tarantino doesn't do a lot of sex scenes in his movies, and that might actually be for the best for all of us. I don't know if we necessarily need that. If Quentin knows his strengths, we'll just stick to that.
Yeah,
Me too.
Exactly. Exactly.
I was looking at some of the reviews. It was a financial success. It was only made with $500,000, which you don't make a movie for that anymore. You rent the camera equipment for $500,000, and it grossed over $2 million. I do love some of the reviews that were written about it at the time. One of them from the New York Times said that Pam Grier, quote, was fast becoming a bore despite all the sex, brawls, and gore. Okay. Variety said that they didn't like the dialogue and that she was reasonably competent and self-assured. Gene Siskel gave it 1 out of 4 stars, saying, quote, some critics have found meaning in recent Black films featuring large, well-endowed women as heroic figures. I find nothing groundbreaking about that. Foxy Brown is selling Pam Grier's body just like it was sold a couple years ago in a half dozen Philippine women in prison pictures. So I don't really know if the men are all right. I don't know if they weren't in 1974. The movie's not perfect, but it's worth noting that one of the few reviews written by the Atlanta World Daily said that Pam Grier, had the star caliber to carry a film. They didn't like the script, but they compared Pam Grier to Jane Russell, which that's a worthy comparison. Both women were often only seen as a pair of boobs and transcended, but the reviews from this time just feel very 1974.
Yeah, that's interesting because everybody I've ever talked to who's watched this movie loves this movie. I'm not sure what the disconnect was. I mean, obviously it's not necessarily supposed to be. Parts of it I think are supposed to be thought-provoking, but overall I think it is just like a piece of entertainment. So I don't know like why they went so hard against it. Pam said that there was a lot of praise just in the general community. And then people, I believe she named like the NAACP started leading like the backlash charge against her. I don't know if it was for Foxy Brown or for some later movies, but it's funny because it's such an enduring film and blaxploitation in general, like just growing up as a kid, just seeing a lot of it being referenced in music videos and things. So it's such an enduring genre. Even things like Dolomite comes up in a lot of later things that when I was a kid, I don't think I even like realized that it was referencing that. It's kind of funny like how critics kind of react to things and then also what actually ends up enduring beyond that review, because I feel like it's such a backbone of our culture that I can't imagine not having a Foxy Brown. When we watched this movie, we were just, this is amazing. She flies a plane. This is great. How could you hate this?
Make no mistake, I do love that she utilizes Sid Haig, who is the pilot for the plane, and just flies a plane with no training and does a pretty damn good job of it. I would have crashed just right out the gate. I didn't know that they actually attempted to redo this or at least do a TV show about this. So as of 2016, they were going to do a television show based on Foxy Brown with Megan Good. That never materialized.
I feel like me and you talked about that, Brittany, maybe in our episode. It's been a long time since I've gone back to that episode, but I feel like that was something that we brought up. My personal feelings of Megan Good have changed a lot since we recorded that episode. That's something that I don't really know how that would work.
Yeah, I don't.
Like maybe it would be like an alias or something type, like spy thing, or she's going undercover and different scenarios for justice.
I don't really know, how you would do the plot, because there isn't really much plot to the movie, which is boyfriend gets killed. She wants vengeance. She goes undercover as a sex worker. And that's really it. The third act where she's sent to the farm is because she gets caught. I could see somebody misinterpreting the movie as make it a spy show where she's Foxy Brown, she goes undercover in different things, or like a Quantum Leap type of thing where it's like a different mystery of the week. Even if you tried to do it as a period piece, I don't really think you could do the plot of the film. I don't know. I think it's a bad idea, with or without Megan Good.
But if you look at it through the lens of a Western, it could work. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's a great idea. I'm just saying Gunsmoke lasted 50 years. All of the most popular shows right now are actually Westerns. You have Fallout, which is a Western. You have Mandalorian, which is a Western. Everybody's working with IP Westerns. If you treat Los Angeles like the Wild West and have Foxy Brown being the sheriff or the law person in her community, then it could work. I still don't think it's a great idea because I feel like this story is rather insular and she rides off into the sunset. Everything is fine, or at least resolved.
If we're going to remake it, can we just please not put Megan Good in it, because times have changed and I don't want that anymore. But Lashana Lynch, who did do a Bond-esque thing in the Bond that she did, that would be cool. Maybe Jodie Turner-Smith, that would be interesting to see. But really, when it comes down to it, there is not enough plot to justify a TV show. Will that stop Hollywood from trying to capitalize on name recognition? No. But I'm hoping it never happens and it just stays an idea.
Maybe it could be like a mini series if we're still doing mini series, but as an actual mini series that will not be greenlit the second season, because that gets the mini series part of it. But I love that idea of her being like the law of Los Angeles and going around and regulating the multiple different cities of LA County, especially like if it was a Western spin, like if she actually wore a hat and carried a gun and all that kind of stuff. I think that'd be fun because a lot of those shows, I almost forgot about The Mandalorian. I haven't watched any of the new episodes or anything like that since the first season. But yeah, a lot of things that have popped up in the last 5 or 10 years have been Westerns, have been like the most popular things have been Westerns. And I feel like if someone could have the delicate sensibilities and the nuance needed to translate this and not just treat it as see famous actress have an afro and wear period clothing, then it could be fun. But also, I don't know, it could go left real quickly. So it sounds fun on paper, but long term, I could see it falling apart pretty quickly.
Yeah. Dilute the exploitation aspect of it a little bit. That might be slightly helpful if they wanted to translate it to the small screen.
I do want to throw out before we close, I want to talk about two side characters that I was fascinated by, which I've already brought up. Catherine Loder, who plays Catherine Wall. She was also prison warden in another Pam Grier movie, but I just love her weird Eartha Kitt-esque energy that she's giving in this movie. She's purring all her lines. She is definitely thirsty for the guy that is mid, and they castrate at the end. We didn't even bring up the fact that the end of this movie ends with Foxy Brown gaining her revenge on the guy that sent her to the farm by cutting off his junk and then presenting it to Catherine Wall in a pickle jar. And she drops it, breaks it all over her floor. That's really the worst punishment that this character gets, is your dude is castrated and dead. And also Antonio Fargas, who plays her brother Link, who is just horrible. He's just dumb. He just makes bad decisions because he thinks they're gonna benefit him, and then they don't benefit him. What I was struck by when I was watching it, Foxy Brown is dating a guy who is black as well. And yet Link is dating a white woman. So, you know how like when characters in noirs, when they do something, you're like, that's the killing move right there. I'm like, that's how I knew Link was doomed. Get in bed with a white girl. This is what's going to happen to you, sir. I had to shout both of them out because they do really well in very minor roles that they have.
It's so revolutionary to see a movie of this time go, white women, horny for patriarchy. They're in it too. And it's like, good for you, Foxy Brown, screenwriter. She is just as bad. She wants all of his power. And when he gets castrated because she wants the power, her life is over. It's so good.
We talked about this on our discussion of Foxy Brown. Link is so self-serving in all of his interactions with Foxy. I don't even think he really means not ruin her life, but cause her so much like heartache. He just kind of does it because he's just in the moment and wants to get paid and doesn't really consider anything beyond that. Having the white girlfriend is also another layering of that. If we're talking about supporting and uplifting the Black community and you're out here getting people killed and dating white women, it doesn't bode well for how you fit in with the community, because Foxy's always talking about we have to lift up everyone. I'm trying to get justice for not just my boyfriend, but for myself, or not for just revenge for myself, but for everybody who's been arrested or have been seduced into taking drugs, or just all the things that were like kind of befalling the Black community at the time. Link is just like, hoo-hoo, I'm just out here on my own, not really caring about anybody.
Link as a character is just, I feel like we all have a relative like that to some degree. Even though they are trying to get ahead, life keeps coming at them and they can't. You may also have a family member or friend like Foxy who's always there to bail you out, even though you didn't mean any harm to your family or your immediate community, it still befalls them. I did enjoy Antonio Fargas's portrayal of Link, and this was probably my second introduction to him because I know he played Huggy Bear on Starsky and Hutch, but I never paid attention to him outside of that role, and to see that, yeah, he has that spark. He is a very great actor.
That's the other thing. Not to besmirch Jackie Brown, which again I love, but there's no real sense of community in Jackie Brown's life that I noticed in this movie because of how pervasive it is. Samuel L. Jackson's character is a villain. He's the drug dealer. The only other Black person she interacts with in that movie is his girlfriend, who is presented as very meek and mild and clearly under his control. So, Quentin, I know you're listening. You aren't. I'd like to think you are. I have questions. I have questions about why. I need to know why.
He just wanted to deify Pam in a way that he just kind of had her singular. I don't think she really has any friends in the movie either. She kind of spends
she's a lone wolf.
Of the time. Her intro, the intro of her character, she's just by herself and she's, on the little, whatever that like moving walkway is. And she talks to her coworkers a little bit. We don't really see her interact with anybody outside of Robert Forster's character, Max Cherry, also Samuel L. Jackson's character. It would have been nice to see like how she, again, like how Foxy Brown is so well respected and well loved in her community, and people know her. I'm sure people know Jackie and people like Jackie, but it would have been cool to see. And I know like Quentin loves Pam, but it would have been nice to see her interact with more people beyond just the people that were integral to the whole plot.
Foxy Brown is one of the best Pam Grier movies, one of the best. There are several. I shouted it out on Twitter at the time, but you can also watch a lot of her movies on Tubi for free. They have Friday Foster, they have Sheba Baby, they have Black Mama, White Mama, they have Coffee, they have this. So definitely do a Pam Grier film fest and watch all of her movies because they're great. And this really, I think, is the gold standard just in terms of costumes are epic, the plot makes sense, but really you're just kicking back to watch Pam do her thing, and I loved it. Ashley, final thoughts on the movie.
She's a legend. She's an icon. She was always the moment. 50 years ago, it doesn't even feel like this was 50 years ago, but it was such a huge revelation to watch this and just see one of our legends really command the screen. And really, she is the presence of that movie. You just want to watch her all the time. You don't want to take your eyes off of her. She's so good. We try to give her flowers all the time, just as individuals, but also as a podcast. Probably should do another Pam Grier movie soon. I think we're overdue. Everybody should watch Foxy. It's so much fun. The costumes, the hair, the fighting, threatens her brother at one point with her gun. She definitely means business. I feel like it's like almost like inspiring. I was like, I just kind of like put my fist through a wall, like, just fight somebody because Pam's out there doing it. And people have called her like first modern day action star. I would heavily like support that because she just does so many things. I feel like she's doing her own stunts a lot of times in this movie. On the budget of $500,000, she probably is. So you're just seeing her do things that as Black girls, we don't really get to see that much of. The tide is changing, but I always like to say, like, go back to like where things originated, how we got started in the industry, and also just seeing like how cinema builds upon itself. I feel like all the things that girls get to do, Black girls get to do in films nowadays, it's because of Pam, and she's so legendary and iconic. And Pam, we love you.
Pam Grier is such an influential figure in Black cinema and cinema overall that we have to continually give her flowers because she deserves it. If you're interested in watching Foxy Brown, to absolutely do it. And also watch all of her other early films that Kristen mentioned are available on Tubi. She's just an inspiration to so many people, actors, actresses, and just everyday people. Watching Foxy Brown, it was an empowering moment to know that she kicks so much ass. And it was just a really fun experience to watch it.
When we were planning our editorial for this year and I saw that it was the 50th anniversary of Foxy Brown, I think I was like, we have to do this. We have to discuss this. We have to discuss this movie. Spending so much time with film people as I have in my life and the education that people get, everybody always talks about Chinatown also having its 50th anniversary this year. They talk about these really big seminal auteur movies as the things that define film. And you have to have a special conversation, all of the inflection implied, to put Foxy Brown into the canon of classic film. But obviously it is. It gave us the incredible career of Pam Grier. It gave us a whole vocabulary of costuming, of set designs, of how people interact with their communities, of Black women on screen. Please consider Foxy Brown not a B movie. Consider it classic cinema. Consider it its history and its legacy, and Pam's history and legacy. And I'm just so happy that we talked about it on this show.
Let us know what you think about Pam Grier, Foxy Brown, any of that. You can always email it to us at ticklishbiz@gmail.com, or we are on all social media platforms at ticklishbiz or ticklish_biz if you were on Twitter. We'd love to thank Brittany and Ashley once again for joining us. Please tell everybody where they can listen to your podcast, anything you have upcoming that they should know about.
We are BLK Girl Film Club on Twitter, and we're Black Girl Film Club on Instagram if you want to come hang out with us. We are on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the like, at Black Girl Film Club. We're tackling movies based off of TV shows in our next couple of episodes. And then we're going to have a big Pride blowout fest. We always try to do something fun for Pride. So those are our next 2 episodes. We kind of do 2 to 3 episodes a month. So probably not as high volume as some other podcasts. But yeah, come hang out with us.
That's going to close out Ticklish Business for today. You can listen to us wherever you get podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Reviews matter, and we have not gotten one in the entirety of 2024 so far. So leave us one on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars should do. You can follow us on all social media, as I already mentioned, at ticklish_biz on Twitter, as well as Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at ticklishbiz. We have all our TCM Classic Film Festival video up there. Also got a great trip to Greystone Manor that we did, as well as the MGM exhibition over at the Hollywood Heritage Museum. Be sure to follow us on our social medias. You can always follow me at my official website, which is KristenKLopez.com. I'm on all social at KristenLopez88. Ms. Emily Edwards, where are you?
Well, you just spoiled that one. I am absolutely everywhere. Website, Twitter, again, regrettably, Instagram, Blue Sky, all at Ms. Emily Edwards.
Yes, so be sure to give us a follow, especially as our Patreon helps keeps the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ and gives us chances to do new things like the 3, count them 3, TCM Film Festival audio episodes that are already up there. You can hear the intro to Pulp Fiction, the intro to Little Women. You can hear me making a lot of noise and clapping during that Little Women talk. Not one of my finer moments. As well as all sorts of recordings that we did, and the Ben Burt, Craig Barron intro before them. It's all up there, and that is all Patreon exclusive. That's at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Emily and I are hard at work on multiple books. So if you'd like to give us some encouragement, you can buy our books, which are available on all book retailers. Help us feel motivated to write more books by buying our books. We will be returning on May 29th, the new episode. Till then.